They told me not to go into the forest. The black forest, they whispered, is a place where the veil between the living and the dead wears thin, where footsteps echo without a source. And the trees remember. Every child in the villages that border it has heard the tales of headless horsemen, weeping witches, wolves that walk like men. I heard them too, but I went anyway. I was never one to heed warnings, and maybe I was hoping the stories were true. My journey began in late autumn. The air in Baden-Württemberg had already begun to chill, and the skies hung heavy with clouds that refused to rain. I took a train to a forgotten village near the forest's southern edge, a place where time seemed suspended. Cobblestone streets, timber-framed houses, and elders who watched strangers with cautious, knowing eyes. I stayed at a Gasthof, run by a silent old couple. The woman left soup at my door each night without knocking. The man smoked outside for hours, eyes fixed on the tree line. They never asked why I was there. Perhaps they already knew. Perhaps the forest had taken others before me. On the third morning, just before dawn, I slipped away with only a rucksack and my notebook. The path into the forest was barely marked. Just an old wooden sign, Betreten verboten. Do not enter. And still I stepped forward. The air changed the moment I crossed into the trees. It wasn't colder, but it pressed against my skin differently, denser, watchful. The ground was soft with rot and leaves, and every sound, a cracking twig, the flutter of wings, rang out like a gunshot. But deeper, I went chasing shadows of old legends. I wasn't looking for a single story. I wanted to feel the weight of them, all the collective memory of centuries of whispered warnings. The forest is older than empires, older than the language we use to describe it, and within its tangled roots lie secrets we were never meant to remember. That morning, I reached the clearing, known in old maps as Hexenfeld, the Witch's Field. It's not marked today, but I had found a record in a dusty university archive, a 1602 woodcut depicting a ring of trees, scorched and twisted like claws. It matched what I saw. No birds sang there, no insects buzzed, just silence. I placed my hand on one of the trees. The bark was warm. Later, I would learn that in 1631, this place had been the site of a mass burning 12 women and one young boy accused of summoning wolves and dancing with the devil. The executioner's journal spoke of howls in the night and how his men would not sleep for 3 days after. Standing there centuries later, I felt them. Not as ghosts or figures, but as weight, a heaviness in my bones, a sorrow in the soil. I kept walking. Not far beyond Hexenfeld, I stumbled upon a stone structure, half swallowed by earth and ivy. A shrine, perhaps, or a tomb. Its entrance was blocked by debris, but I noticed symbols, runes carved into the stone. Some were Norse, some older. My fingers traced a spiral that pulsed faintly, as if the stone still breathed. I sketched it in my notebook. The pages, until then crisp and white, felt strangely damp, though no rain had fallen. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote one word: Watcher. That night, I made camp by a stream. The wind hummed through the branches like a distant lullaby, but sleep never came. I saw eyes yellow low to the ground watching, then gone. The next morning, I found prints by the water. Not paws, not hooves, something else. Something walking upright. But what disturbed me most wasn't the tracks. It was what lay beside them, an old medallion, iron and cold, with the emblem of an oak tree split by lightning. The same symbol I had traced on the shrine. It hadn't been there the night before. As I packed up, I noticed that my compass needle spun in lazy circles. Useless. I wasn't lost in the physical sense. I could still retrace my steps, but I began to feel unmoored, as if the forest itself was folding around me. And that was only day one. You see, Germany's dark forests don't just hold monsters. They remember. They echo. They preserve the nightmares we buried under reason. And if you listen closely, if you let go of disbelief, you can hear them. Some say myths fade because we no longer need them. I disagree. I think they hide, waiting for us to come looking. And when we do, they awaken. I didn't come to disprove legends. I came to witness them. And now, I think they've noticed me too. Stay with me as I take you deeper. deeper into the myths that breathe behind the bark, deeper into the Black Forest. I didn't expect to hear hooves. The forest, for all its legends, had been quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that pulses in your ears. But on the second night, as I walked along what must have once been a logging trail, I heard it, the faint, rhythmic beat of hooves on earth. No clinking of metal, no whinny. Just the sound, steady and slow, as if some invisible rider was keeping pace with me in the dark. I stopped. The sound stopped. I moved again, so did it. There was no moon that night, only a sickly layer of cloud above the trees. I clicked on my flashlight and swept it across the dense underbrush, but it barely pierced the mist. And yet when I listened, truly listened, the hooves weren't echoes. They were approaching. I turned off my light and waited. The sound came closer, then circled. It wasn't galloping. It wasn't even walking. It was floating, like the idea of a horse more than the animal itself. I held my breath, then silence. I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I found something on the trail ahead, a horseshoe. Old, rusted, and broken in half. I picked it up, and etched into the iron was a name in faded Gothic script. Gottfried. No last name, just that. And I knew then I had heard the legend before. In a tavern near Lake Tittacy, an old man had once told me a story, not as a warning, but as a confession. He spoke of the Kopflos rider, the headless rider of the Black Forest, a ghost cursed to ride endlessly through the woods, seeking something or someone. Gottfried was once a dragoon, a soldier in the imperial wars of the late 1700s. He was said to be a ruthless man, loyal only to the coin. When he and his men were ambushed by rebels near the southern passes, Gottfried fled. He left his own troops to die in the gorge while he rode north through the forest seeking sanctuary. He never made it out. Days later, his horse returned, without him, soaked in blood, its saddle empty. His body was never found. Only his head, they said, was nailed to a tree near the logging trail, as a warning from the spirits he betrayed. For 2 centuries, travelers have told of a rider seen at dusk, tall, armored, cloaked in mist, yet headless. His horse leaves no prints. His presence silences all birds. And where he passes, the scent of iron and rotting leaves lingers. I told myself it was a coincidence, a story too easily inserted into any night terror. But deep down, I knew better. As I followed the path deeper, I came to an old milestone buried under moss. Brushing it clean, I saw the date. 1792. The year Gottfried vanished, and beside the stone, faint as breath, was the impression of a hoofprint in dry soil. I took out my notebook, intending to sketch it, when I heard the sound again, hooves slow and circling. But this time, I wasn't alone. Through the trees, I saw a figure. A horse, still, watching. No rider, but the saddle was full. I couldn't see a face, there was none. Just an orb faintly glowing, hovering above the collar of a faded uniform. I blinked and it was gone. I didn't run, I don't know why. Perhaps part of me believed I had to stay, to listen, to witness. As night fell, I made a small fire and sat in a circle of stones. Around me, the trees whispered with wind, but the forest never truly moved. And then I saw it again, not with my eyes, but in the corner of my mind, a battle frozen in time. Men screaming without sound, swords flashing in moonlight, and at the center, a rider with no head, swinging a blade that burned with ethereal fire. When I awoke the next morning, my fire was cold, and around it lay hoofprints in a perfect circle, untouched, unbroken. In the center, a pendant I had never seen before, a small silver disc, etched with the symbol of a raven perched on crossed swords. The same symbol I would later discover that adorned the hilt of Gottfried's ceremonial dagger, now housed in a museum in Freiburg. Was I marked or warned? One thing was clear: the legends of the forest aren't dead. They watch, they listen, and sometimes they choose someone to carry their stories forward. And I was being chosen. The rider is not just a tale to scare children. He is sorrow personified, betrayal made flesh, or what remains of it. And in a forest as old as myth itself, he is not the only one. Stay with me. We've only just begun. The deeper I went into the forest, the more the air seemed to change. It thickened, not just with moisture, but with history, memory, a kind of presence. I could feel it pressing on my skin like fog with fingers. On the third day, I entered the marsh. Locals call it Hexenmoor. The Witch's Moor. The name alone was enough to keep hikers and hunters away. It doesn't appear on modern maps. Even GPS signals flicker and die at the tree line. But I had found it not through satellite, but through story. An old woman in a Freiburg library told me of it. Her grandmother had once lit candles each October to keep her at bay. She never said who her was, only that the marsh wakes when it's forgotten. I arrived near dusk. The ground was soft beneath my boots, and every step released a smell of peat iron and decay. Trees here were skeletal, long dead, but somehow standing. Their bark blistered, their limbs bare. Water pooled in strange, unmoving ways, reflecting nothing but sky. That was when I saw the well. It jutted from a small rise like a wound in the earth. Made of stone older than the village ruins I had passed its rim, was carved with symbols, runes, crosses, crescent moons, even a five-pointed star. Some were worn by time, others freshly carved. On the stone lip, I found a jar, sealed with wax. Inside, ash teeth and a lock of black hair bound with red twine. My breath caught. I knew the tale. Adelheid of the Mere, a girl born in the 1500s. Illegitimate. Her mother was accused of witchcraft and burned while Adelheid was still swaddled in rags. Raised by outcasts, Adelheid grew wild, talking to animals, singing to rivers, dancing in storms. Villagers feared her, yet sought her when crops failed or children fell ill. Then came the famine. A child disappeared, then another. The villagers blamed Adelheid. They dragged her to the old well, bound her in chains, and drowned her in the mire. But when they returned to bury the body, it was gone. All that remained was her hair, floating atop the water like a crown. And ever since, they say, she waits. People who enter Hexenmoor after sunset vanish. Others are found days later, their mouths filled with mud eyes, wide open hearts ruptured in their chests. The old woman in the library had whispered it. She does not kill you, she shows you what you fear, and then you do the rest. As night fell, the forest became unnaturally quiet. Not the gentle silence of sleep, but the silence of something holding its breath. I built no fire. There was nothing dry to burn. I sat on a flat stone near the well and watched the mist gather. It rolled like smoke, thick and alive. Shapes moved within it, not animals, not birds. Something older. Then I heard it. A voice, faint, female, humming a lullaby that made my teeth ache. I stood, slowly. Every instinct screamed to run, but I stayed. I had come to witness, to listen. The voice grew louder, and from the mist she emerged. Not a hag, not a shadow. A girl no more than 16. Her skin pale as ash hair, dripping eyes glowing faintly, like wet coal. She didn't walk, she drifted, feet never touching the ground. She stopped before me, tilted her head, and then spoke. You don't fear me, why? Her voice was water over glass. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. She stepped closer. I remember you, she said. That's when I noticed my hands, covered in muck. My boots sunk deep in the marsh. I looked around, panicked. I hadn't moved, but the land had shifted. The well was gone. The trees were gone. Just black water. And her. She reached out and touched my chest. You carry stories. Good, I need you to carry mine. The world exploded in silence. I woke at dawn flat on my back by the well. The jar was gone. The stones around the well were wet, not with dew, but with tears. My journal lay open beside me. A single word scrawled across the page in ink I didn't own. Remember. I did. I still do. Adelheid isn't a monster. She's a wound. A memory that bleeds into the land when we try to forget her. She's not alone in this forest, but she's the first to speak. And I will not be the last to listen. The Black Forest is not just home to legends. It is made of them. There are places in the forest where the trees seem to step back, where even nature dares not reclaim the land. I found one such place on the fourth day, an abbey long forgotten, nestled in a clearing, so silent it rang in my ears. No birds, no insects, not even the rustling of wind in leaves, just nothing. The ruins rose from the earth like ribs of a long-dead beast. Stone walls fractured and moss-covered. An old bell tower collapsed into itself. Ivy climbed the edges, but stopped short of the altar, as if held back by something unseen. I had stumbled upon Sankt Erlosner Abbey, though no current map named it. I recognized it from a woodcut in an old Jesuit book, The Church of the Redeemed Martyrs, built in 1124. Abandoned in 1613, after what was only referred to as Das Schweigen, the silence. There are few records of what happened here. Most were burned, but one survived barely. A letter from a monk named Matthias, written to the Bishop of Strasbourg. We no longer speak. The music has gone dark. The children are lost. God does not answer. I thought it metaphorical, a poetic rendering of plague or war, but standing there in the skeletal chapel, I felt it the weight of unsung prayer, the ache of voices that once rang and now had no mouths. At the center of the ruin was a stone circle, maybe once a cloister. At its heart, a broken altar. Upon it, faint traces of red, not fresh, not recent, but deep, almost etched into the stone by time and repetition. I sat. Something about the place invited stillness. In the stillness, I listened. At first, I thought it was the wind. Then, the sound sharpened. High, eerie, mournful, like a distant flute made from something brittle. The melody was slow, ancient, and it came from beneath. I followed the sound. Behind the altar, hidden under collapsed stone and brambles, I found a narrow stair, descending into darkness. Each step groaned with age, the air growing colder as I went. My flashlight flickered, struggling. At the bottom, a crypt, bones, dozens of them, stacked in niches, arranged in patterns. A wall made entirely of femurs and skulls. But it wasn't their presence that chilled me. It was how they were posed. Some had jaws wide open, heads tilted back as if caught mid-song. At the center of the crypt was a reliquary broken open, its contents spilled across the floor bones, polished smooth, some carved into flutes, panpipes, even organ pipes, instruments of worship, made from the devout. Then the music grew louder. I turned and saw him, a monk or the memory of one, robed in black, hood drawn low. In his hands he held a bone flute, and from it the sound poured not notes but grief. Each breath called forward another ghostly face, mouths open in silence. A choir of the forgotten, they stood in rows, unmoving, yet the music pulsed with their presence. I couldn't move. The monk turned toward me, slowly, and with a voice like dust over parchment he said, "You hear us?" I nodded. We were punished for praising in the old way, with flesh and marrow, not gold and marble. They silenced us. He stepped forward. But music lives. He raised the flute again, and I saw the finger bones along its length were engraved, with names, dozens. As the music rose, I began to feel them not as ghosts, but vibrations. The sound wrapped around my ribs, my skull, my breath. It filled me, carried me. I saw visions, the abbey in its prime, filled with candles and children. I saw joy, then fire, screaming, silence, then black. When I awoke, I was on the altar, alone. The crypt was gone. No stairs, no opening, just stone. In my hand, a piece of parchment. A single line of music drawn in blood-red ink. Beneath it, a signature. Matthias. I had carried his voice back. And as I walked from the ruins, the wind returned. The birds began to sing again. And for a moment, the forest felt lighter. But only for a moment. Because for every song, remembered a dozen still wait beneath the moss and bone. And the Black Forest never forgets. It simply waits to be heard. The further north I went, the colder the forest became, not just in temperature but in spirit. Snow began to lace the edges of the pines. My breath fogged in the air, and though the landscape was blanketed in white, the unease in me only deepened. It was on the fifth night that I saw the first tracks. They looked human, barefoot, narrow, with a strange spread to the toes, but after 20 meters, they shifted, grew longer, clawed, and by the time they vanished into the snow, they were unmistakably lupine. This was no animal, and not quite a man. Locals in Bavaria don't speak of it openly, but I had read the footnotes in folklore archives, the werewolf, not the Hollywood monster, but something older, more sorrowful. A spirit born not from bite, but from starvation, from betrayal. It was said that during the harsh winter of 1629, when famine swept the Alpine valleys, a family of woodsmen vanished near the village of Wülflitz. They were found weeks later, the father, mother, and child, but not as corpses, as predators. A monk's journal preserved in a hidden monastery vault described them covered in ragged fur limbs, twisted eyes yellow and sunken. They walked upright but ran on all fours. They howled when the moon rose, not in rage, but in mourning. They had eaten human flesh. But this wasn't mere cannibalism. It was ritual, a transformation born of despair. I arrived near Wülflitz late that evening. The village was all but abandoned, a scattering of empty homes, and one church half swallowed by snow. My footsteps echoed on frozen wood. Every shutter was drawn. The wind howled like it remembered. I took shelter in a crumbling hunting cabin at the edge of the forest. Inside, the fireplace was cold, but there were signs it had once burned brightly old antlers. Above the mantel, a bear pelt nailed to the wall, now torn through the center. As I unpacked my gear, I found something lodged beneath the floorboards, a bundle wrapped in cloth. I opened it slowly. Inside, a silver knife darkened with age, and a note in script that trembled with fear. Silver binds the soul, not the beast. Do not forget. I didn't sleep. Just past midnight, I heard the first sound, a soft padding outside. Not quite paws, not quite feet. I peered through the frost-covered window and saw her, a woman, naked but for a ragged fur cloak, pale as snow. Her eyes amber, her hands clawed and trembling, blood on her lips. She looked at me, not with hunger, but sorrow. Then she turned and vanished into the trees. I followed. The cold bit deep. Branches tore at my coat, but I kept after her, not running but listening. She didn't flee, she led. Through twisted trees, over frozen creeks, until we reached a hollow, a circle of ancient stones half buried in ice. At the center lay bones, dozens of them, some animal, some not. She knelt beside them and began to sing, a low guttural melody. It vibrated in my ribs like something older than language, a song of mourning, of memory. I stepped closer. She looked up and spoke not with words, but with breath that became thought. We were not monsters. We were cold. We were hungry. They locked their doors. They watched us starve. Tears froze on my cheeks. We changed to survive, and now they call us curse. She extended her hand. In her palm, the silver knife. Carry the truth. I took it. The world blurred. Snow swirled like a storm. I collapsed. When I awoke, I was back at the cabin. The fire burned, though I hadn't lit it. The knife lay beside me, cleaned. Etched into the blade, a name I hadn't known. Isolde! I later found record of her. A girl from Wülflitz, declared missing in 1629, accused of witchcraft and theft. The priest who condemned her wrote only, "She chose the wolves, but I don't think she chose. I think the forest did, and it remembers her, just as it remembers me now. There are beasts in these woods, yes, but not all of them are born with fangs. Some are made, forged in winter, in silence, in hunger, and their songs still echo between the trees. Listen carefully. You might hear them too. They call it Turm der Stille, the Tower of Silence. No one builds a tower in the middle of a forest." That's what I kept telling myself when I first saw it, rising through the mist alone, tall and bent ever so slightly to the east, like it was bowing to something unseen. There were no paths leading to it, no markings on maps, and yet I found it. It appeared suddenly, after days of wandering a portion of the forest I had already passed through. Or at least I thought I had. My compass spun. My watch stopped. The trees whispered differently here, slower, more deliberate. The tower was made of stone, each block smooth, and strangely warm to the touch. Ivy clung to its base but didn't rise. Nothing grew higher than the first few feet. Nature, it seemed, refused to follow. There was no door, only an arched opening gaping at the base like a throat waiting to swallow. I stepped inside. The air shifted instantly colder, heavier. A spiral staircase hugged the inner wall made of stone and iron, winding upward with no visible end. I looked up. Darkness. I looked down. Just the single step I stood on. I began to climb. At first, it was like any other tower. Narrow steps, silence. Then came the whispers. Not loud, not coherent. Just fragments. Names I didn't recognize. My own voice calling out from ahead. Laughter, screaming. Silence again. I kept climbing. Every so often I passed what seemed like windows. But when I looked out, the forest beyond was wrong. Sometimes there were two moons. Sometimes the trees moved as if breathing. Once I saw a version of myself staring back, older bruised eyes, hollow. And he shook his head. Still I climbed. I don't know how long it lasted. Hours, days. I never tired. I never felt hunger. My body moved, but my mind drifted like it was detaching from time. Then I found the backpack. Tattered, faded, dusty. Inside a notebook, pages torn, names crossed out. One entry still legible. I've passed the same window 17 times. The forest changes, but the loop is real. If you're reading this, turn back. I didn't. I couldn't. I had to know what waited at the top. Eventually, the stairs opened into a chamber. Round. Empty. In the center hovered a massive hourglass suspended in air, neither resting nor spinning. The sand inside was frozen mid-flow. All around it mirrors. Dozens of them cracked and warped, each reflecting something different. A child screaming, a wolf devouring its tail, a man aging in reverse. In one, I saw my father. In another, I saw the woman from the marsh Adelheid, her eyes closed, humming. And in the last mirror, I saw the tower itself still being built, block by hundreds of shadowy figures. And one of them was me. I turned and found the staircase behind me gone. Only smooth stone wall. I reached for the notebook. It was gone. Panic rose. I ran to the window. But the world beyond had changed again, the forest now black, and twisted the sky violet with 3 suns hovering low. And then a voice, soft, mechanical, inhuman. Time does not pass here, it accumulates. The hourglass pulsed. A sudden sound, bells ringing but distant underwater. I fell to my knees. The air cracked, and in a single moment I was falling. When I woke, I was outside the tower. Dawn had broken. My watch ticked again. My backpack was intact, but my journal pages missing, and one new entry in unfamiliar handwriting. He saw the top. He cannot unsee it. I turned back. The tower was gone. Only trees. Only fog. But in the days since I've noticed changes. Shadows move where none should. I speak aloud without realizing it. Sometimes, I hear the bell in my dreams. The Tower of Silence doesn't trap you inside it. It follows, and if you ever find it, don't climb. Unless you're ready to lose the version of yourself that stepped in. Some legends protect, others record. The tower, it remembers. And now, so do I. The map I carried didn't show the lake. And yet there it was. A wide, still body of water, hidden in a basin of hills, shrouded in fog that never lifted. I first glimpsed it from a ridge, a sliver of red in the moonlight. I thought it was a trick of the fading sun. But even when darkness fell, the color remained. It wasn't sunset. The water was red. Locals once called it Blutzy. The Blood Lake. A name whispered, never spoken aloud. No trails led here, no signs, no campsites. Even the birds seemed to avoid it. But I was drawn in. The air around the lake was thick, warm, despite the snow on the nearby slopes. The ground grew soft and muddy. With every step I sank a little deeper, as if the land itself resisted approach. I reached a warped wooden dock. Half broken, its slats bowed and splintered. A single lantern hung from the edge, unlit. Still, I could hear it, a hum beneath the silence, like a voice just below the threshold of sound. I knelt at the water's edge. It didn't smell like blood. It didn't smell at all. But the surface was thick, viscous, and completely still. No ripples, no movement, like glass but alive. I dropped a stone. There was no splash. It simply vanished. Then the crying began, faint, childlike. A weeping so soft I thought it came from the trees. But the echo wasn't carried by wind, it rose from beneath the lake. I stood heart racing. Something was in the water. That night I camped on the ridge overlooking the lake. I built no fire, just sat and listened. The crying came and went, sometimes replaced by humming, sometimes by silence, so heavy it crushed thought. Then came the dream. I was standing at the dock. A woman stood beside me, tall, with flowing black hair and a white dress stained at the hem. She said nothing, just pointed to the lake. In the reflection I saw dozens of faces staring up, eyes open, mouths agape, all reaching toward the surface. And in the center of them, a chapel, sunken, its steeple crooked, bells ringing underwater. I woke with blood in my nose and mud on my hands. When I checked the lake again, I saw it beneath the surface, just barely visible, the outline of a structure, a roof, stone steps leading down into the depths. It hadn't been there the day before. I approached, and that's when I saw her, floating near the dock, face down, hair fanned like ink in water. I shouted, ran, but when I reached the edge, there was nothing. Only ripples, only red. Later, I found fragments of the story. In a monastery archive, water-stained and half-burned. In 1348, during the Black Death, the village of Whittemore was sealed by order of the bishop. The healthy and the sick alike were trapped. When the cries grew too loud, he ordered the valley flooded. The church was last to sink. They say its bells still ring beneath the surface, and so the lake remembers. The villagers drowned, forgotten, their bones never recovered, their voices silenced not by time but by fear. But they are not quiet. That night I lit the lantern, set it at the dock. I sat, and I waited. Eventually the water stirred. A figure emerged, not walking, not swimming, but rising. Not solid, but not shadow either. A woman, the same from my dream. Her face pale, her eyes black. She looked at me and spoke. "Do you remember us?" I couldn't speak. She extended her hand, and I saw her wrist was chained. Dozens more rose behind her, men. Women, children, all bound by iron, all silent. The lake glowed redder. "Carry us," she whispered. "Tell them we were here." I nodded, and in a blink they were gone. The lantern flickered out, and in the water something floated toward me. A bottle, inside a scroll marked with the Whittemore seal. When I opened it the next day, I found a single line. "Our sins are buried, but we are not." I left the lake in silence, but I have never been dry since. Somewhere in the distance, I still hear the bells. And sometimes in dreams, I walk down those stone steps and sit among the drowned. They do not blame. They only ask to be remembered. And I do. I always will. There are places in the forest where your footprints disappear behind you, not erased by wind or rain, simply gone, as if you had never stepped there at all. I found one such path on my 8th day. It began like any other, a narrow trail lined with moss and bramble, a crow calling overhead, the air sharp with pine and cold. But after a mile, something shifted. The trees grew taller, the canopy denser. The sky vanished, and I couldn't remember how I got there. I had no recollection of turning off the main trail, no sense of direction. My compass spun lazily. My GPS flickered, then went black. And my journal, the pages I had filled with notes and sketches, were blank. As if the forest had taken my memory and pressed reset. Panic crept in. But deeper still, a calm, a strange pull, like something welcoming me home. I walked. Hours passed, or minutes. Time had lost its edge. Then, I saw a tree twisted and scorched with a trail marker carved deep into its bark. Below it, a name. Jacob Lenz, 1998. I paused. The name rang faintly familiar. I flipped through the blank journal, hoping for something, anything. A note, a scribble. And then a word appeared, faint, fading. Still here. I spun around. No one. But just beyond the tree line, I caught a shape, tall, lean, unmoving, watching. I called out. It stepped back. I chased it. The forest shifted with each step, paths, curling roots, rising trees, closing like gates. I lost sight of the figure, but found something else. A circle of stones. Inside a campfire, still warm. Around it, 4 backpacks, shoes, a scarf, a child's water bottle. But no people. Only the wind. I rifled through one pack and found a camera. Its screen, cracked battery low. I turned it on. A single image flickered, a selfie of a young woman, smiling, surrounded by 3 others. Behind them, the same stone circle. They had been here, and they hadn't left. I searched the clearing. On one tree, I found a message carved deep, ragged. "We're not dead, but we're not remembered." Beneath that, 4 names, including Jakob Lenz. I sat trying to make sense of it. And that's when the fog rolled in sudden, fast, like breath exhaled by the forest itself. Shapes moved in the mist. Dozens. Not threatening, not hostile, just present. They walked in slow loops, paused, looked toward the trail, then turned back. One came close, a woman in a red jacket. Eyes vacant, skin pale. She raised her hand, pointed to my chest, and mouthed a word I couldn't hear. Then she dissolved into mist. I ran. Branches clawed. Thorns tore my sleeves. But the forest didn't stop me. It guided me toward a tree with bark peeled back like parchment. There, scratched into the flesh beneath, was my name. Already there. Already fading. I collapsed. I don't know how long I lay there. When I woke, the fog had lifted. The trail behind me had reappeared. I was back on the map. But I was not the same. Because some part of me is still there, walking that path, circling the stone ring, waiting to be remembered. And I know now the Black Forest doesn't just haunt the dead. It holds the forgotten. Those who lose their way and are never looked for. Those who vanish without story. They become something else. Not ghosts, not echoes, but a kind of memory the land itself wears. So if you ever see a stranger in the trees, someone who looks familiar but whose name you can't recall, stop, look closer, and remember them. Because forgetting is how the forest keeps them, and remembering is how we set them free. The deeper I went, the more I stopped asking where I was. I started asking who I was becoming. By the 9th day, the forest was no longer something I entered. It was something I carried. It breathed with me. It listened when I thought. And when I was silent, it spoke. It began subtly, a whisper on the wind that mimicked my thoughts. Footsteps that matched mine perfectly, not echoing, but anticipating. A bird that cried the exact note I had hummed seconds before. And then the trees began to say my name, not aloud, but etched into bark, scratched into stone, pressed into the patterns of fallen leaves. Wherever I looked, I found fragments of myself written where no hand should have reached. "You are close." One tree set its scars fresh. "The story waits," but another warned. I had stopped marking my trail, not because I trusted the way, but because I no longer cared to return. One morning, I woke in a clearing I had never seen, but somehow remembered. It was perfectly round, silent. At the center stood a stone altar, ancient, cracked, overgrown. On it, my journal, open to a page I had not written. Every story must end. Every legend must begin. And someone must stay to keep the memory alive. I turned, and the forest moved. Not in wind, not in storm, but in attention. The way a room grows still before something important is said. The air vibrated with anticipation. The trees leaned closer. And then came the light, soft green from nowhere and everywhere. And with it, figures emerged. Not spirits, not illusions, but stories. Every legend I had followed, the rider, the witch, the singer, the wolf, they stepped into form, not as ghosts, but as roles. Archetypes, living memories draped in shadow and time. They surrounded me, watched, waited. One stepped forward, the monk with the bone flute. He raised it, played a single note. It struck my chest like thunder, and I remembered everything. I remembered the voice in the marsh, the sand frozen in the hourglass, the crying lake, the footsteps with no return. I remembered the day I chose to enter the forest, not just to record, but to belong. The monk lowered his flute. The woman from Blutze stepped forward. Her hand hovered before my chest. "Are you ready to stay?" she asked. I didn't answer, because I knew I already had. I stepped toward the altar. My journal glowed faintly. Its pages turned without wind. One by one, the legends wrote themselves, not as I had recorded them, but as they were. The truths behind the myths, the blood beneath the bark. And on the final page, one line appeared. He listened. So we remember. I placed my hand on the stone. The forest exhaled. All around me, the legends bowed, not in reverence, but in ritual. In passing of the torch, I was not their witness anymore. I was their voice. My name faded from the journal. My image I later saw carved into bark beside the others, not as a man, but as a figure cloaked in shadow, holding a pen of bone and a lantern of ash. The storyteller, the one who stayed. I don't remember leaving the forest. Perhaps I never did. But if you find this journal, if you read these words, then know, I am still there. And when the wind brushes your shoulder or the mist whispers your name, it's not to scare you. It's to invite you. Because the forest is always writing, and it needs someone to listen. This is the part where I'm supposed to say I made it out. That I escaped the forest, wrote it all down, and lived to tell the tale. But the truth is harder and softer. Because the forest does not let you go. It only lets you remember. When I awoke, I was lying beneath a tree I didn't recognize. Morning light filtered through the branches, gold and soft like breath. Birds were singing. My pack was beside me. My journal closed. My name still inside it. No figures, no whispers, no monsters. Only peace. But a strange kind of peace. The kind that comes after you've forgotten something important, something you almost remembered but not quite. I stood stiff from sleep. The path before me was clear. A dirt trail winding gently through pine and fern. It looked ordinary, harmless, like the kind you find on postcards. And yet, my chest ached, like I had left something behind I would never get back. I walked. The further I went, the more the memories faded. Names, faces, places. They drifted from my mind like mist in sunlight. I reached the edge of the forest by afternoon, where a road met a wooden sign. Willkommen. I blinked. I had been here before. There was a small village nearby, tidy, silent, with old men smoking pipes and women hanging laundry in the breeze. No one stared. No one asked. I rented a room at a guest house that didn't need my name. That night I opened my journal. The pages were full, but not in my handwriting. Each page told a different story. The writer, the witch, the monk, the lake. And at the very end, a final line written in red. It remembered you, so now you remember it. I closed the book. I never opened it again, but I kept it, tucked beneath my coat wherever I went. I traveled, spoke little, watched more, and always in the back of my mind the rustle of leaves, the crack of twigs, a flicker of movement in the corner of my vision. Years passed, but the forest never left. Sometimes in cities far from Germany, I smell peat smoke on a warm breeze. Sometimes I hear bells where no church stands. And sometimes, not often, but enough, someone asks me, "Have you heard of the Black Forest?" And I smile. Because yes, I have. I lived its legends. I was written into its roots. And I know even now that it waits. Not to trap, not to punish, but to preserve. Because stories are not just told. They are kept. Some in books, some in memories, and some in places. The Black Forest is one such place. And if you ever feel the pull, if the trees seem too quiet or the fog lingers too long or the wind whispers your name, don't be afraid. Just listen, step lightly, carry a notebook, because the forest never forgets. And now neither do you.